tell you a story. On the morning of June 20th, 1837, Alexandrina woke up to find that she was now the Queen of England. Until that day, she had been brought up in relative seclusion under the strict tutelage of her mother and her mother's domineering advisor, Sir John Conroy. They tried to manage every aspect of her life. She'd never been in a room alone, and she'd never walked down the stairs by herself. And she had been educated only in languages and history, and she had spent many hours playing with her dolls and her dog Dash. And she had no experience working with the people outside of her little world. So on this day, when this 18-year-old girl came to power, the whole country stood like it was crazy. And there was much speculation and political maneuvering, and they were questioning, what would she do? How would she lead? How would she rule? She was but a little girl. Who would rule her? And so we're going to watch a movie. Can you see?
Pardon, ma'am. A messenger from Windsor is here. He has a black armband on his right arm. You are first to know.
And no one else knows. I came straight to you, Sir John was instructed.
Good man. I must get to work. I suggest you smarten yourself up. You're a steward of the Queen's household now.
The messenger's here. With the black armband. Your Majesty. I can manage this. Alone.
It is my sad duty to inform you that the King breathed his last at 12 minutes past 2.
My poor dear uncle. May God have mercy on his soul.
Your Majesty.
The history buff in me wishes I could tell you everything that was going on in that scene and set it up more for you, but there's not time. But I wanted you to see that immediately everything was at rest, but when they heard, everybody began scrambling. It's a very pivotal time in any nation's history when there's a switch for power. They began to maneuver themselves and position themselves by her side for their own interests. And the key question was, who was going to advise her? Who would have her ear? Would she be anybody's puppet? Was she pliable to other controls? The the Bible is full of such stories of kings and queens and their counselors. One such story is the story of Rehoboam's inheritance of his father Solomon's throne. In this transition of power, there is just as much political intrigue and stress. And to really understand what's at stake for Rehoboam, however, it's essential that we understand where in the story it's situated in the overarching narrative of Scripture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly cover the story of Scripture and look at it specifically on the theme that the kingdom of God is building. So we're going to go over it quickly, but it's really important. Okay. So the foundation of the kingdom is the created word, and in the beginning, God created a beautiful world and mankind to rule over it as his regents, his viceroys on earth, and for him. And the mandate to rule, subdue, and multiply on the earth is the activity that humanity is about, but it's tainted in the beginning by sin and the curse, and yet God continued his kingdom-building program anyway. And then the next major section comes when God makes a covenant with Abraham and promises him a people, a land, and a blessing. The covenant was unconditional and established by God himself. And then God started to deliver on the promise with the miraculous birth of Isaac, who fathered Jacob, who in turn fathered the 12 tribes. And then we know they were in Egypt, and they became a nation, a distinctive nation that God had set apart. And eventually, they were enslaved there, but then God gave them the gracious gift of miraculous national salvation from slavery. The Passover, as we know, is a formative event in the establishment of God's kingdom, for it became part of their history, their psychology, and their national narrative. It was a story to be repeated and remembered and celebrated, and is still celebrated today. And then as they left Egypt and entered into the wilderness for what became a 40-year stay, God provided them with a law. Every nation needs a law. And it was his law to govern his people and to further set them apart. And then God brought them into the land that he had promised to Abraham. And though not completely or in the way that they were instructed to, they occupied the land and conquered it for him. Then after some time, they were ruled by various judges, and people asked for a king, and the time of the kings began. We have Saul, David, Solomon, and now Rehoboam. King David defended the land from the Philistines and sought to secure their presence there, and he established Jerusalem as their capital city. And then David sought to build a house for God, but God stopped him, and instead, God built a house for David. He gave him the Davidic covenant, which was also unconditional, and it was just as secure as the Abrahamic covenant. There would always be a king of the Davidic line on the throne. Then Solomon came to power, and God allowed him to build a temple to not only establish Jerusalem as the seat of the nation's government, but to establish it as the heart of God's activity on earth as well. And then God filled the temple with his glory, and in it, in ways we cannot comprehend, he was dwelling in the midst of the people with his glory filling the Holy of Holies. And at this time in history, it's the glorious reign of Solomon, with all the kingdoms and nations of the earth were looking and saying, wow, look what God is doing there. So when Rehoboam came to power and inherited his father's and grandfather's throne, he did not have just huge shoes to fill, but it was during the pinnacle of Israel's history. And now, as we know, that at the beginning of each level, now as we know from the beginning, each level of the kingdom was riddled with sin and just horrible things. But at this time, even though there's trouble throughout, it was the glorious time. It was a great place, supposedly. And they were under the rule, or they had been under the rule, for 40 years of the wisest man ever, supposedly. And there were good reasons for the people to grumble. There was a lot going on that wasn't all right. And yet, despite this, at this stage in the nation's history, it was at its all-time glory. And one morning, this 41-year-old man woke up, and was the king of the then greatest nation on the world. And all eyes were on him. And there was massive potential for change in power and in policy. What would he do? How would he reign and rule? who would advise the new king? So let's listen to the story.
Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all of Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. And as soon as Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard of it, for he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon, then Jeroboam returned from Egypt. And they sent and called him. And Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, Your father made your yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you. He said to them, Go away for 3 days, then come again to me. So the people went away. Then King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men, who had stood before Solomon his father, while he was yet alive, saying, How do you advise me to answer these people? And they said to him, If you will be a servant to these people today, and serve them, and speak good words to them, then they will and when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever. But he abandoned the counsel that the old men gave him, and took counsel with the young men, who had grown up with him, and stood before him. And he said to them, What do you advise me that we answer this people who had said to me, Lighten the yoke that your father put on us? And the young men who had grown up with him said to them, Thus you shall speak to this people who said to you, Your father made your yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. Thus shall you say to them, My little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. And now, whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the 3rd day, as the king said, Come to me again the 3rd day. And the king answered the people harshly, and forsaking the counsel of the old men had given him, he spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by the Lord, that he might fulfill this word, which the Lord had spoken by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. Okay, so we have 2 counsels here. So we have a one counsel that gives first advice, and a second counsel that gives first advice. So who can tell me on our first advice here, what are some things that you notice about the first advice that he goes to?
It was wise counsel.
Wise counsel? Yeah, they were the older gentlemen who stood before the wisest king, King Solomon, the guy who was the wisest king in all of Israel. He stood before them. This was his counsel, and they were considered elders in the kingdom. All right, what else do we know about the counsel that the wise, this first advice? What else do you guys see in it?
It had the interest of all the people, not just
Yeah.
a small group.
It was an interest for all the people. And it says, I love how it says in there that if you serve them, they will serve you forever. So it's a call and response. So like the people will serve them forever. All right, anything else that you guys see in the wise counsel or the first advice? All right, what about the second advice? What else do we hear from the second advice?
They grew up with him, so they were his friends.
Yeah, they grew up friends. They were probably around his age, 41. They didn't have any standing in the kingdom. They were just his friends. All right, what else do we notice about this advice that is given?
Arrogant.
Arrogant? Okay. Yeah, it's kind of for like selfish reasons, it seems like. All right. Anything else?
Invoking fear upon the people.
Fear. Okay. Any other thoughts, feelings, or actions in regards to this advice?
It was more harsh than the previous rulers.
Yeah, it was harsher than the previous rulers. Yeah, so while his father did have some labor, this one would be even more. This would be more heavy. It says it will discipline you with scorpions, which is supposedly just a heavier whipping that has the sting of a scorpion. All right, any other thoughts, feelings, or actions? All right, well, this is what we found. So when we looked at the first advice, they were old men, they were elders, we had talked about it. I got it from 1 Kings 4, 2 through 7, that they stood before Solomon, his fathers. It's Rehoboam, and the first one has a call to action, and his call to action is to serve the people this day. And I love how it has a people's response, because we don't see that in the. It says if you serve him this day, Rehoboam will be your servant forever. And so in this, we saw that it was a servant leadership. All right, and then we see our second advice. So we also saw that there were the young men, they had grown up with him, they didn't really have any standing in the kingdom. And Rehoboam, they give Rehoboam the call to action, and it will add to your yoke and discipline them more harshly. But we don't see a response from the people. We don't see how the people would respond. We know how they'll respond because this is the action that he chooses. But we don't see a response that the people would respond anyway. And so we kind of saw it as a dictatorship and a bully. All right. So what do kings and queens have to do with us? So what do kings and queens have to do with us? They're making decisions every day for a full kingdom, but we're also making decisions every day. I know when I graduated college in 2013, I had to make a big decision. Do I stay in College Station, and I was working at the ice rink there, or do I go home? And I really didn't want to go home because my mother had said, get out, and there was a lot of problems going on. And so I stayed there in College Station for a while with this family that I knew. It's 2 kids, they had 2 kids at the time, a mom, a dad, and a grandmother, and they were all working at the ice rink together. But there was a lot of drama going on, and so they ended up deciding to leave working at the ice rink. So I was working at the ice rink. The family, I was living with this family, and then the mom was pregnant. And so a house of 5, a small house with 5 people in it, and I was like, gosh, like, I'm working at the ice rink, and I'm like living with this family, and I'm like, I feel like I need to leave, whether it's like go back to Houston or like find my own place. And I was like, so what do I do? And I didn't want to go home, obviously. I didn't want to face what I had to face at home. And so I went to this older lady that I knew, and I was like, what do you think I should do? And she was like, well, I think it sounds like you should probably go home. I'm not sure if you're going to do that, Alyssa, but I think that sounds like the right decision. And then I had other friends who, their roommate was leaving, and so they wanted another roommate. And so they were like, yeah, you should stay in College Station, work at the ice rink, it's going to be all good. And I was like, always waking up shaking, because I was like, what do I do, God? And so it wasn't until I asked that question, what do I do, God, that I knew my answer. And he said to go home. And so I went home, and it completely rechanged my life, because now I'm here in seminary. I'm working for the public health department, and I've just seen how God is continuing to like bless that and like work through my situation. And so every day we have to make decisions. We're always completely making decisions, whether how you get to work today, or how to get to school today, what are you going to wear today, where are you going to work? I've been thinking about moving and leaving my job. Should we work? Do you go to school? Where do we go to school? Should we stay in school? Where do we go to church? Where do we put our kids in school? Do we homeschool our kids? Do we put them in public school? Do we put them in a Christian school? And so we all have decisions that we have to make. And so when I look at the Bible and I see that we had Rehoboam, and he had some great people that go before him. He had David, he had Solomon, and then it was him. And so let's consider the source when we're making decisions, when we're going to advice. Let's consider where we go to. And so where did David go to? We say in 2 Samuel 2:1, it says, in the course of time, David inquired of the Lord. Shall I go up to the one of the towns of Judah? He asked. The Lord said, go up. David said, where should I go? And so David went directly to the Lord. All right, what about Solomon? Where did Solomon first go? It says in 1 Kings 3:7-9, now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people? And so he asks for discernment. He goes to God first in this situation. And so we saw that Rehoboam did have wise counsel. He had that first one. We all kind of considered it was wise counsel, that old group. And so he had this wise counsel, but he didn't heed it. He didn't take notice of it. He completely completely didn't listen to it. He forsake the knowledge of the wise counsel. And so today, I guess my question for you today is, where do you go for wise counsel? So just think about it for a minute. What decisions are on your plate right now? Think about your decision. If you have a piece of paper on, you can write it down for a second. But what are your decisions that you have right now? That just take a moment and think about it. What big decisions, little decisions do you have on your plate right now? Okay, so if you've written down that decision, no, you can continue thinking on it. But do you have wise counsel? Do you have advice to go to? Have you gone to God? And do you seek and heed that counsel? You know, I don't know why Jeroboam made the decision he did. It doesn't make sense to me. But his decision had immediate and long-lived consequences. The nation went through great upheaval, and ultimately it was divided in two. Jeroboam led 10 of the 12 tribes away and established the nation of Israel in the north. And there he set up a new capital, an alternate form of worship, and led them down the road of idolatry and apostasy. And ultimately there were 3 different capital cities, 19 wicked kings, and 9 different dynasties. The kingdom lasted for 210 years and were ultimately destroyed by Assyria. And Rehoboam reigned the kingdom of Judah in the south. Jerusalem remained the capital, and there was the Mosaic law and the temple. And it remained at least a surface level. Ultimately, there were 20 kings and 1 usurper queen. She was bad. And only a few of the kings were godly or sought counsel from the Lord. Judah, also for the most part, chose idolatry and apostasy. And as we know, after 345 years, they were destroyed by Babylon. And all of this was a direct consequence of this nation's sin, but of Rehoboam's unwise decision to follow foolish counsel. And as a result, his legacy stands in a great juxtaposition to his father as the unwise king who officially set into motion the destruction of God's kingdom on earth. What a legacy. Thankfully, as his kingdom was failing, God, through his prophets, was revealing another kingdom yet to come, one that wouldn't be tainted through and through by sin. But that's a great story for another day. The following clip we're about to show you is just full of scenes and important decisions, one after the other, that Alexandrina made in her first days as queen.
I offer you my condolences on the death of your uncle.
He was always kind to me. Though he did have some strange ideas about who I should marry.
So I believe he favoured the Prince of Orange.
Prince with a head the size of a pumpkin.
I see you have a keen eye for detail, Mark. Yeah? What's her name?
She doesn't have a name. She's number 123. My mother gave it to me on my 11th birthday.
With the crown?
Came later. I made it for her on the day I realized I would be queen.
When was that?
I was 13. I was having a history lesson with Lacey. She showed me the family tree, and I looked at it for a long time. And then I realized I was next.
Were you pleased?
I remember thinking my uncle's crown would be too big for me. I believe you're acquainted with my mother's advisor, Sir John Conroy.
I met him. Lots of acquaintances. He would like to be your private secretary.
That is out of the question.
I see.
He means to run me, as he runs my mother.
Well, then you must have your not. Perhaps I might act for you. The great deal of business that needs to be attended to. Dispatch boxes, I imagine, probably already on their way to you with documents that require your signature. Of course, tomorrow is the Privy Council.
Thank you, Lord Lambeth. But when I require assistance, I'll ask for it.
In that case, well.
You are going to Kensington Palace.
To swear allegiance to my niece.
She is very young and rather delicate. Now your foolish brother is dead. If anything should happen to her, you are the heir to the throne.
Gentlemen, shall we?
Now that it is pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy my uncle.
Copy.
I know that I'm young. And some would say my sex puts me at a disadvantage. But I know my duty. And I assure you, I am ready for the great responsibility that lies before me.
Your Majesty.
Lord Ilchester.
Your Majesty.
Lord Howard.
Your Majesty.
Viscount Falkland. Lord Shaftesbury.
Your Majesty.
Lord Fitzroy.
Maybe you know this one.
Your Majesty.
Uncle Cumberland. When will you be going to Hanover?
I'm in no hurry. My first loyalty is to the British throne.
I'm sure the people of Hanover will be sorry to hear that.
I believe there's quite a crowd outside waiting to hear the proclamation. Perhaps now would be a good time to show yourself in the balcony.
In the proclamation, I'm referred to as Alexandrina Victoria, but I do not like the name Alexandrina. From now on, I wish to be called Victoria.
Queen Victoria.
In this clip, we saw Alexandrina, hard to say, reject the foolish counselor outrightly and totally disassociate herself from him. And her uncle, the greatest threat to her kingdom and her life, she also dealt with him rather well. We are also introduced to the then Prime Minister of England, Lord Melbourne, and at their official first meeting, he cautiously sought to advise her, a move she initially rejects because she doesn't trust anybody. She also boldly chose what her name would be. Yet as the scene progresses, she realized she needed counsel, and ultimately she chose to let Lord Melbourne help her. Lord Melbourne helped her successfully establish herself as the rightful constitutional monarch of England. And the history buff in me wants to tell you all about it, but I'll spare you. But overall, she reigned for 64 years. She bore 9 children and became the empress over the kingdom on which the sun never set. The era of her rule is known as the Victorian era, and even house styles and prudish manners still bear the vestiges of her reign. And even today, her great-granddaughter Elizabeth is the ruling monarch of the United Kingdom. And I like the video because it shows that on the first days of her rule, her legacy was established. She made it through those lines of learning how to rule, and she did it.